My own son kicked me out of the house I built for him, all to protect his fragile, pregnant wife. I packed my bags in tears, thinking I was doing what a good mother should. But a frantic midnight run to the emergency room exposed a secret so vile it completely shattered their perfect little world. You see, when the truth finally slipped out, I realized there was never a baby at all. My name is Beatrice. I am 62 years old, and for 30 years I walked the halls of the public school system as a high school principal. Every long hour, every stressful board meeting, every sacrificed vacation was for one single purpose. My son Jamal. I raised him on my own, pinching pennies and pouring every ounce of my love into his future so he could graduate debt-free and become the successful architect he is today. I even bought a beautiful 4-bedroom suburban home, working double shifts to pay it off completely, dreaming of the day I would pass it down to him and my future grandchildren. We had a bond that I thought was unbreakable. He was my pride, my joy, my everything. But love, no matter how deep, can sometimes blind you to the monsters standing right in your living room. The nightmare started on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was folding laundry when Jamal sat me down on my own velvet sofa. He was tightly holding the hand of his wife, Chloe. She sat there looking fragile, staring at the floor, while my son looked at me with an expression that turned my blood to ice. He cleared his throat and delivered a blow that knocked the wind right out of me. He said Chloe's pregnancy was high risk, and her doctor claimed that living in the same house with me was causing her severe emotional stress. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but his face remained dead serious. Then came the cruelest twist a mother could ever hear. Jamal told me I needed to pack my things and move out immediately. He had already found a cramped, cheap senior apartment across town for me to live in, and as if kicking me out of my own paid-off home was not enough. He casually mentioned that Chloe's brother, Travis, was moving in. Travis was a slick, arrogant man who had never held down a real job in his life. But Jamal insisted Travis needed my master bedroom so he could help care for the baby. I sat there completely speechless. I looked at the son I had given my youth to the boy whose dreams I had built with my own sweat, and I saw a stranger. My heart shattered into a million pieces right there in the living room I had decorated for our family. I had given him everything, and he was throwing me away like yesterday's trash just to appease a woman who wanted my life without me in it. Let me take you back a few years back, before the silence and the cold stares replaced the warmth and laughter in my home. My husband, God, rest his sweet soul, passed away when Jamal was only 7 years old. From that heartbreaking day on, it was just the two of us against the whole world. I was a young teacher back then, working my way up the steep ladder in the public school system, fighting for every promotion and every raise until I finally became the principal of a large high school. Those years were anything but easy. I remember sitting at my heavy oak kitchen table until 2 or 3 in the morning, grading endless stacks of history papers, with a cheap flickering desk lamp illuminating the dark room. We lived on incredibly tight budgets for so long that I forgot what it felt like to buy something just for myself. I stretched every single dollar clipping grocery coupons and wearing the exact same 3 tailored suits to work for 5 years straight. I skipped vacations, ignored my own exhaustion, and turned down dinner invitations so I could afford to send Jamal to those expensive summer architecture programs, and eventually to a top-tier university. I sacrificed my youth, my social life, and any chance at finding love again, all to ensure my son would graduate completely debt-free. I wanted him to start his adult life at the starting line, not 10 steps behind where everyone else was standing. And for the longest time, Jamal made every single one of those sacrifices feel like a profound privilege. He was the kind of son any mother would fall to her knees and thank God for. He was respectful, deeply kind, and fiercely protective of me. People in our neighborhood used to affectionately call him a mama's boy, and he wore that title with absolute pride. We were an unbreakable team. Every Sunday, no matter how demanding his college exams or his early career deadlines got, he was right there at my dining table. We would sit together for hours, eating my smothered chicken and collard greens, while he enthusiastically showed me his latest architectural blueprints. He would hold my hand, look me right in the eyes, and tell me that one day he would build me a massive mansion from the ground up. I always laughed and told him I didn't need a mansion, because the beautiful 4-bedroom suburban home I had worked double shifts to pay off was already my palace. That house was my sanctuary. It was a physical, undeniable symbol of everything I had overcome as a black woman raising a black man on her own in this country. I loved every inch of it, from the vibrant rose bushes I planted in the front yard to the original hardwood floors I polished on my hands and knees every single weekend, because my love for Jamal was absolute and completely without condition. I made a decision last year that I thought was a beautiful, forward-thinking step toward our family's future. I went to a lawyer and voluntarily added Jamal's name to the deed of my house. I wanted to start building true generational wealth, a real legacy that he could pass down to his own children one day, without the heavy burden of probate courts or greedy legal fees. I wanted his future wife and children to know they had a solid foundation, something permanent in a world that takes things away so easily. I remember handing him the thick leather folder with the updated deed. He hugged me so tight, tears welling in his eyes, promising he would always protect our home and take care of me. I trusted him with my life, my heart, and my entire life savings. I truly believed we were laying the unbreakable foundation for a beautiful family empire. I never could have imagined that the very foundation I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into would be the exact weapon used to destroy me. Everything in my perfectly built world began to rot the exact moment Chloe stepped through my front door. Chloe was a petite, white American woman with a bright, heavily rehearsed smile and sharp eyes that constantly evaluated everything in the room, sizing up the financial worth of my life like an appraiser. At first, she played the part of the sweet, eager girlfriend flawlessly. But the moment Jamal slipped a heavy diamond ring on her finger, a slow, insidious shift occurred in the energy of my home. It started with subtle microaggressions, the kind of nasty, underhanded little comments wrapped up in a pretty bow of fake concern, designed to make you sound completely crazy if you ever dared to complain about them. She would walk into my kitchen, watch me season a pot of gumbo, and sigh loudly with exaggerated worry. "Beatrice, you use so much butter and heavy seasoning. It is just terrible for Jamal's blood pressure. You really should try cooking cleaner, healthier meals for him now that he is getting older." It was expertly framed as helpful advice, but her tone reeked of pure condescension. Then her unsolicited critiques moved to my clothes and my home. She would look at my vibrant, colourful church dresses and suggest I tone it down to look more elegant and age-appropriate. She would run her pale fingers over my antique mahogany furniture, the precious pieces my late husband and I bought when we first got married, and call them charmingly outdated. She even went so far as to bring home catalogues aggressively, suggesting we completely gut and modernise my entire living room to suit her modern tastes. But the absolute worst of it, the part that truly broke my spirit, was the relentless gaslighting. Chloe was a master emotional manipulator, twisting reality daily until I almost didn't recognise my own mind. She started intentionally misplacing my personal belongings. I would leave my reading glasses on the coffee table exactly where I had placed them for the last 10 years, and hours later they would vanish, only to mysteriously show up in the back of the kitchen pantry. I would frantically look for my car keys, and she would somehow find them buried in the laundry room. Then she would look at Jamal with wide, innocent eyes and whisper loud enough for me to hear Jamal, "Your mother is getting so forgetful lately. It is honestly becoming a real safety concern." I worry about her living alone. She even started claiming I said awful, insensitive things to her whenever Jamal was at work. She would cry real wet tears, telling my son I had insulted her family background, or her cooking, knowing full well I had never uttered a single word of disrespect toward her. And my son, my brilliant, loving Jamal, fell for her theatrical performance every single time. He started looking at me with heavy pity and visible frustration, treating me like a fragile, confused old woman who needed to be constantly managed, as if Chloe's daily psychological warfare was not enough of a burden. Her brother Travis quickly became a permanent unwanted fixture in my house. Travis was a slick, arrogant man who walked into my home with an overwhelming, infuriating sense of entitlement. He would show up completely unannounced, aggressively, raid my refrigerator eating food I had spent hours preparing, and leave his dirty, muddy boots right on my freshly cleaned rugs. He treated me not as the respected owner of the house, but as the hired help. He would leave empty beer bottles scattered on my pristine back porch and expect me to quietly clean up after his chaotic, loud weekend visits. Whenever I gently asked him to respect my space and clean up his messes, he would smirk, look me up and down and say, "Relax, Beatrice." Jamal said I could make myself at home. It is his house too, right? Every single time. Travis threw that technical fact in my face. A heavy, suffocating weight settled deep in my chest. I had given Jamal my home out of pure, selfless maternal love, and his new family was violently using it to strip me of my daily dignity. I endured this slow, agonizing layer of disrespect in utter, humiliating silence. I swallowed my pride, bit my tongue until it practically bled, and walked on eggshells in the very house I paid for with decades of hard work. I did it for one reason only. Chloe had recently announced she was pregnant. The terrifying thought of being completely cut out of my future grandchild's life was a pain I simply could not bear to imagine. I desperately convinced myself that if I just kept the peace, if I just endured the nasty condescension, the lies, and the disrespect, things would eventually settle down once the baby arrived. I sacrificed my own peace of mind, my comfort and my boundaries to keep my family together, completely unaware that these people were already smiling while digging my grave. Moving day arrived with a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on my chest like a physical weight. I stood in the exact center of my living room, surrounded by dozens of brown cardboard boxes that now held the entirety of my adult life. 30 years of beautiful, hard-fought memories had been ruthlessly reduced to packing tape and black marker labels. I carefully wrapped the delicate porcelain figurines my late husband had bought for me on our 10th anniversary, my hands moving with a slow, mechanical numbness. Every piece of tissue paper I folded felt like a burial shroud covering a life that was forcibly being ripped away from me. This house had always smelled of warm cinnamon fresh linen and the blooming roses I tended to in the front yard. Today it smelled only of dust, cardboard, and cold, harsh reality. I traced my fingers along the doorframe of the kitchen, feeling the small, faded pencil marks where I had measured Jamal's height every single summer until he left for college. I was leaving pieces of my soul embedded in these walls. The jarring, aggressive sound of heavy footsteps suddenly pulled me from my silent grief. It was Travis, Chloe's brother. He strutted into my pristine home, holding a massive, overflowing cardboard box filled with tangled cords, video game consoles, and cheap beer bottles. He did not even bother to wipe his thick, muddy boots on the welcome mat I had just washed the day before. He simply marched right past me, heading straight down the hall toward my master bedroom. The bedroom where I had nursed my husband during his final days. The peaceful sanctuary I had carefully maintained and cherished for decades. Travis dropped his heavy box onto my polished hardwood floor with a loud, scraping thud that echoed violently through the emptying house. He turned to look at me with a lazy, entitled smirk that made the bile rise in my throat. "You better make sure you get all your old junk out of that walk-in closet, Beatrice," he said, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogance. "I have a lot of expensive gear coming tomorrow morning, and I need the space cleared out completely." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard, I tasted metallic blood. I absolutely refused to let a man who contributed nothing to this world see a single tear fall from my eyes. I turned away, continuing to pack my kitchenware, but my hands were shaking so uncontrollably that a glass slipped from my grip, shattering into jagged pieces on the tile. Where was my son? Where was the boy I raised to respect his elders, the man who promised to honor the ground his mother walked on? I left the kitchen and found Jamal standing outside in the driveway, staring blankly at the side of the rented moving truck. He had barely spoken 2 words to me all morning, cowardly hiding behind his phone. When I approached him, his shoulders stiffened, and he immediately shifted his gaze to the cracked pavement, utterly unable to look me in the eye. "Jamal," I said, my voice barely above a raspy whisper, thick with unshed tears. "Are you truly going to stand here and let this happen? Are you really going to let a disrespectful stranger take over my bedroom while you send your own mother away like discarded furniture?" Jamal aggressively rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling a long, shaky breath that offered no comfort. "Mum, please do not make this harder than it already is," he muttered, his voice defensive but incredibly weak. "Chloe is highly stressed right now, and her doctor was very clear. He said any spike in her blood pressure could severely harm the baby. I am just trying to be a protective father, Mum. I have to put my pregnant wife and my unborn child first. You have to understand that." I stared at the man standing before me, desperately searching for the son I knew. He was a highly successful architect, a man who designed and built towering, unshakable structures for a living, yet he completely lacked the spine to stand up for the mother who laid his very foundation. I did not argue. I did not scream or beg. I simply turned around, picked up my heavy purse, and walked to my old car. The drive across town to my new apartment was the most isolating, agonizing journey of my entire life. When I finally turned the rusty key and pushed open the door to the senior living complex, a wave of profound despair washed over me. The small, cramped apartment smelled faintly of old, damp carpets and stale cooking oil from the neighbors. The ceilings were low and the windows were tiny, letting in only a bleak, depressing fraction of the bright sunlight I was so used to waking up to. The walls were paper-thin, offering no privacy, and the hum of the rusty refrigerator was a constant, irritating drone. I sat down heavily on the edge of the cheap, sagging mattress that came with the furnished room, clutching my purse to my chest. And in that dark, unfamiliar room, I finally let the tears fall. I wept until my chest physically ached and my eyes burned with exhaustion. But I was not crying for the beautiful suburban house I had lost. I was crying for the beloved son I had lost. I was mourning the deep, unconditional bond that had been effortlessly severed by a toxic, manipulative woman. I felt entirely discarded, tossed aside into a dark corner to wither away. For 2 agonizing months, I lived in that dingy apartment, isolated and utterly heartbroken. 2 long, miserable months passed in a slow blur of lonely mornings and quiet, achingly empty nights. The bustling, joyful life I used to lead was replaced by a deafening silence that echoed off the thin walls of my small senior apartment. My phone rarely rang anymore. Jamal only sent short, emotionally distant text messages once a week, usually late on a Sunday evening, assuring me that Chloe was resting comfortably and the baby was developing fine. He never asked how I was adjusting. He never asked if I was lonely. I spent my long days sitting by the single dusty window, watching strangers walk their dogs, trying desperately to find a shred of peace in my new, confined reality, forcing myself to accept the bitter pill that my son had made his choice, and I was no longer a priority in his world. But everything I thought I had accepted changed violently on a damp, bitterly cold Tuesday night. It was just past midnight, the kind of deep night where the world feels completely still, when my phone suddenly buzzed frantically on the cheap wooden nightstand. The harsh vibration pierced the quiet darkness of the room, startling me awake. I reached for it with fumbling fingers, squinting painfully against the bright, glaring screen. It was an urgent, chaotic text message from Jamal. "Mum, please come to City General Hospital right now. Chloe is having severe cramping and bleeding. We are in the emergency room. I am terrified. Please hurry." In a single, breathless instant, the sharp pain, the crushing betrayal, and the deep, heavy resentment I had been carrying around for the last 60 days completely vanished. My maternal instinct, that fierce, primal, and protective drive that had defined my entire existence since the day Jamal was born, utterly took over my body. That was my child who was terrified. That was my innocent, unborn grandchild whose fragile life was in immediate danger. I threw off my blankets, hastily pulled a heavy winter coat over my pajamas, grabbed my keys, and rushed out the door into the freezing, rain-slicked night. The tense, frantic drive to the hospital was a chaotic blur of flashing yellow streetlights, wet pavement, and fervent, desperate prayers. Despite every cruel thing Chloe had done to me, despite the incredibly callous way she had orchestrated my eviction and replaced me with her arrogant brother, I prayed intensely for her safety. I begged God to protect the innocent life she was carrying. When I finally parked and burst through the automatic sliding doors of the emergency room, the bright, sterile, fluorescent lights temporarily blinded me. The sharp smell of medical antiseptic burned my nose as I rushed toward the main reception desk. I immediately spotted Jamal. He was standing near the admission counter, frantically scribbling on a thick stack of paperwork attached to a plastic clipboard. He looked utterly broken and exhausted. His shoulders slumped heavily, his clothes mismatched and wrinkled as if he had thrown them on in a blind panic. I was about to call out his name, to run across the waiting room and wrap my arms tightly around his shaking shoulders to comfort him. But I stopped myself. He needed to focus and finish the admission forms, and I needed to see with my own eyes that my daughter-in-law was actually being cared for by the medical staff. I quietly asked the receptionist for Chloe's location, and she directed me down a long hallway to a private consultation room, mentioning they were waiting for an ultrasound technician. I decided to find her room first, just to peek in quietly and make sure she was resting comfortably before I approached my son. I walked softly down the dimly lit, silent hospital corridors, my rubber-soled shoes making absolutely no sound against the polished linoleum floor. The hospital was eerily quiet at this late hour. I found her assigned room at the very end of the hall. The heavy wooden door was left partially open, leaving a narrow crack of warm light spilling out into the dark corridor. I raised my hand, fully intending to push the door open gently and announce my presence, but a sharp, hushed, and incredibly angry voice from inside the room stopped my hand dead, mid-air. It was Travis. What on earth was Chloe's arrogant, freeloading brother doing in her private hospital consultation room in the middle of the night, while my terrified son was out in the lobby, frantically filling out emergency admission forms? I leaned slightly closer to the narrow crack in the heavy door, holding my breath. Completely, my heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. What I heard next made the blood run completely freezing cold in my veins. "You are going to ruin absolutely everything with this stupid, impatient stunt." Travis hissed, his voice tight with a suppressed, vicious rage. "I specifically told you to wait. You have to fake the miscarriage after Jamal signs the final trust documents tomorrow morning, not tonight. If you abort the mission right now before the ink is even dry on that paperwork, we lose the house. We lose the entire estate, you idiot." I froze, paralyzed by the sheer malice and calculation in his hushed words. Fake the miscarriage. Trust documents. Abort the mission. My mind scrambled in shock, desperately trying to process the horrifying vocabulary of a calculated financial con. I shifted my weight silently, pressing my face closer to the narrow opening to see directly inside the room. Chloe was sitting casually on the edge of the examination bed, looking absolutely nothing like a woman in severe medical distress. Her face was perfectly calm, twisted only by intense irritation. She reached down to the hem of her loose hospital gown, and with a swift, frustrated and aggressive motion, she lifted her shirt entirely. I clamped my hand tightly over my own mouth to stifle the loud scream of horror that violently clawed at my throat. There, strapped securely to Chloe's pale, flat torso, was a high-grade, incredibly realistic silicone prosthetic belly. She quickly unfastened a thick, heavy Velcro strap at her lower back and pulled the massive silicone mound away from her body, tossing it carelessly onto the vinyl guest chair next to the bed like a piece of unwanted garbage. "I cannot wear this heavy, sweaty, disgusting thing for another 24 hours. Travis." Chloe snapped aggressively, scratching furiously at her red, irritated stomach where the silicone had been rubbing. "It is giving me a horrible rash, and I'm entirely sick of pretending I cannot drink wine with my dinner. Jamal is completely hooked anyway. He is practically eating out of the palm of my hand. He feels so incredibly guilty about stressing me out that he will blindly sign whatever legal papers you put in front of him tomorrow at the lawyer's office. Just let me tell the stupid doctor I lost the baby tonight and we can be done with this miserable, exhausting charade once and for all." Travis grabbed her roughly by the shoulders, leaning his face mere inches from hers. "Listen to me very closely, you impatient fool," he growled. "My gambling debts are due at the end of the month. The men I owe serious money to do not care about your little skin rash. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, Jamal signs the deed to his mother's house and his liquid assets into an irrevocable trust managed entirely by me, supposedly all to secure his growing family's financial future. Once he signs those papers, the assets are legally locked tight. Then, and only then, you can have your tragic little hospital tragedy and play the grieving mother. Do you understand me? Put that fake stomach back on right now before a nurse walks in here and ruins our payday." I stepped back from the door, my legs trembling so violently I had to lean my entire body weight against the cold hospital wall to keep from collapsing to the floor. The sickening, horrific truth crashed down on me with the devastating force of a freight train. There was no high-risk pregnancy. There was no emotional stress endangering a child. There was never, ever a baby. It was all a masterfully orchestrated, evil long con to manipulate my trusting, grieving son into signing away his life savings and the beautiful home I had worked 30 years to pay off. They had weaponized my son's desperate desire to be a father to strip him of his wealth, and they had used a fake medical crisis to cruelly banish me from my own sanctuary. As I stood alone in that dark, quiet hallway, the hot tears of a grieving, discarded mother instantly dried up on my cheeks. The crushing sorrow and loneliness that had weighed me down heavily for 2 months completely vanished, rapidly replaced by an ice-cold, razor-sharp clarity. I was no longer a heartbroken mother mourning a lost relationship. I was a fierce, protective, and highly intelligent matriarch who had just caught 2 shameless thieves with their hands deep inside the family vault. They thought they had successfully outsmarted a naive, tired pushover of an old woman. They were about to learn exactly what happens when you awaken a mother's righteous fury. I did not burst through that hospital room door. I did not scream, and I certainly did not shed another tear. In my 30 years of managing unruly high school students and navigating the ruthless politics of the public education system, I learned one absolute truth. You never confront an enemy when you are running on raw emotion. You wait until you hold every single card. I took a slow, silent step backward, letting the heavy wooden door remain exactly as it was. I turned around and walked down that sterile, brightly lit hallway with a posture so straight and a stride so purposeful You would have thought I owned the building. When I passed Jamal in the waiting room, still hunched over his clipboard like a frightened child, I felt a sharp pang of sorrow for the son I had raised. But my mind was already 10 steps ahead of his foolishness. I walked out into the freezing rain, got into my car, and drove back to my dingy senior apartment. The woman who walked out of that hospital was not the same defeated, heartbroken mother who had rushed in. That woman was dead. In her place was a matriarch preparing for a very necessary war. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I made a phone call to a man I had hoped I would never need. Mr. Sterling was a formidable, sharp-suited lawyer who had helped my late husband and me navigate some complicated union contracts years ago. He was relentless, brilliant, and completely devoid of sentimentality. I sat in his plush downtown office an hour later, laying out every single detail of the sickening deception I had witnessed. Mr. Sterling listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled in front of him. When I finished, he immediately made a call to a private investigator he kept on retainer. I gave them carte blanche to dig into the lives of Chloe and her brother Travis. I wanted every bank statement, every medical record, and every hidden secret brought into the glaring light. The investigator moved with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours, I was sitting across from Mr. Sterling again, looking at a thick manila folder that held the absolute destruction of Chloe and Travis. The findings were not just bad. They were explosive. Travis was drowning in over $100,000 of illegal gambling debt, owing money to dangerous people who did not negotiate. But Chloe was the real masterpiece of deception. The investigator uncovered a long, documented trail of financial cons she had executed in 2 other states, always targeting men with stable incomes and trusting families. Then Mr. Sterling slid a specific, highly confidential medical file across the desk. It revealed that Chloe had undergone a permanent medical procedure 5 years prior. She was completely physically incapable of carrying a child. She had played my son like a beautifully tuned instrument, preying on his deepest desire to be a father, knowing full well she could never give him one. I looked at the medical records detailing her procedure, and a wave of pure disgust washed over me. It takes a truly soulless individual to fake the creation of a life just to steal a house. I thought about my son, my brilliant but naive Jamal, who had probably spent countless hours dreaming about holding a little baby, picking out names and painting a nursery. He was a victim, yes, but he was also a willing participant in my eviction. He chose to trust a woman he barely knew over the mother who gave him everything. He chose to banish me to a damp, depressing apartment, rather than stand up for his own flesh and blood. That betrayal still stung deeply, but it only fueled my fierce determination. While the private investigator was dismantling their personal lives, Mr. Sterling was meticulously reviewing the property deed and the trust documents Jamal had arrogantly prepared. I will never forget the predatory smile that spread across Mr. Sterling's face when he found exactly what we needed. Because Jamal had forced me out of my home under the explicit, documented threat of a medical emergency that did not actually exist. The entire transfer was fundamentally tainted by coercion and fraudulent pretenses. Mr. Sterling explained that we could immediately file a legal injunction. I could legally freeze the transfer of the deed, lock my entire estate, and completely block Travis from ever accessing a single dime of the trust. We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting the paperwork to put the locks on every asset I owned. I was no longer a victim waiting to be stripped bare. I was the architect of their ruin. The trap was set, the steel jaws pulled back, waiting for the perfect moment to snap shut. Just as Travis had ordered in that hospital room, Chloe miraculously recovered from her high-risk medical scare the very next day. To celebrate the supposedly healthy baby and their newly solidified future, she and Jamal decided to throw a massive, extravagant baby shower. It was planned for a luxury venue downtown, featuring custom floral arrangements, professional photographers, and a catered menu that cost more than a reliable used car. And the most sickening part was that the entire circus was being funded directly from Jamal's hard-earned savings. Chloe spared no expense treating his bank account like a bottomless well. A week before the event, a thick cream-coloured envelope was slipped under the door of my senior apartment. It was a pity invitation, likely sent because Jamal felt a fleeting twinge of guilt, or perhaps because Chloe wanted to gloat. They fully expected me to decline, assuming I was too heartbroken, too defeated, and too humiliated to show my face in polite society. Instead, I picked up a heavy black pen and checked the box for yes. I spent the entire week leading up to the baby shower, moving with quiet, lethal efficiency. I worked closely with Mr. Sterling to finalize the legal injunction on the house and secure every single liquid asset I possessed. I quietly moved my retirement funds and investment accounts into tightly sealed offshore trusts that Jamal could never touch, even if he tried to contest the injunction. I thought about how Travis must be rubbing his hands together, counting the days until he could drain my son dry to pay off his dangerous associates. I thought about Chloe shopping for designer maternity wear to cover a silicone prop, laughing at how easily she had conquered our family. They thought they had won the grand prize, but I was spending my days ensuring that when the dust settled, they would walk away with absolutely nothing. I was protecting the 30 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice that went into building my life. Then I sat at my small kitchen table and compiled a thick, undeniable dossier of absolute truth. I organized the private investigator's photographs, the medical records proving Chloe's infertility, the printed transcripts of Travis's massive gambling debts, and the legal documents proving the fraud. I placed every piece of evidence into crisp, clear plastic sleeves inside a heavy black binder. It was the complete, unvarnished reality of their deception, ready to be presented to the world. But I knew that arriving with the truth was only half the battle. I needed to look like the woman who owned that truth. For 2 months, I had been walking around in baggy sweatpants and faded sweaters, letting the weight of their betrayal physically diminish me. I drove myself to an upscale boutique on the other side of town. I did not look at the price tags. I purchased a stunning, perfectly tailored emerald green pantsuit that draped beautifully over my frame. I bought real leather heels and a matching designer handbag. I visited a high-end salon and had my hair professionally styled, trading my tired look for a sleek, commanding appearance. When I looked in the mirror on the morning of the baby shower, the woman staring back at me was magnificent. She was fierce, she was unbothered, and she was entirely in control. I applied a coat of deep crimson lipstick, picked up my heavy black dossier, and walked out of that depressing little apartment for the very last time. The defeated old woman was completely gone. The principal was about to hold a very necessary assembly. The afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand azure ballroom. It was an obscenely lavish venue. Towering arrangements of white hydrangeas and pink roses adorned every table. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a room filled with caterers, serving champagne and gourmet appetizers. Every single dime paying for this extravagant spectacle came directly from my son's hard-earned savings. I walked through the heavy double doors wearing my new emerald green pantsuit, my spine straight and my head held high. The hostess tried to stop me, but I glided right past her, blending into the crowd of oblivious guests. The room was packed with Chloe's friends, a sea of unfamiliar faces, laughing and drinking. It did not take long to spot Travis. He was leaning heavily against the open bar, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, laughing loudly and acting exactly like a man who thought he had just won the lottery. He patted the bartender on the shoulder, behaving as though he owned the entire building. Then I saw her. Chloe was holding court near a massive mountain of designer baby gifts. She was wearing a form-fitting blush gown that perfectly accentuated her completely fake stomach. She rested her hands lovingly on that silicone prop, smiling sweetly as her friends showered her with compliments and handed her expensive boxes. The sheer audacity of her performance made my blood boil, but I kept my face as calm and unreadable as a frozen lake. I found a quiet spot near the back of the room and simply watched. I watched my son Jamal standing a few feet away from his wife. He looked incredibly tired, the heavy bags under his eyes, a testament to the stress he had been carrying, but he also looked undeniably proud. He truly believed he was protecting his growing family. He had no idea he was merely the mark in a vicious scam. I stood there patiently, a silent predator waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike. I did not have to wait long. A waiter tapped a spoon against a crystal glass, and a hush fell over the crowded ballroom. Jamal stepped up to the front of the room, taking a silver microphone from the event coordinator. He looked out at the sea of faces, his eyes shining with genuine emotion. He spoke about how blessed he felt, how much he loved his beautiful wife, and how he could not wait to meet their precious baby. He raised his glass to the room, toasting to the future, to his family, and to the legacy he was building. As the guests began to applaud, I made my move. I stepped out from the shadows of the back wall and walked straight down the center aisle. The loud click of my leather heels against the polished marble floor echoed sharply, cutting through the applause. The guests parted like the Red Sea, their faces morphing into expressions of sheer confusion. Jamal froze mid-toast, his jaw dropping open as I approached. Chloe's radiant, practiced smile completely evaporated, replaced by a flash of genuine naked panic. I did not say a single word as I walked up to my son. I simply reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling hand. I turned to face the crowd, commanding the entire room with the fierce, unwavering presence of a seasoned high school principal who had spent 3 decades commanding gymnasiums full of unruly teenagers. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice echoing loud and crystal clear through the speakers. For those who do not know me, I am Beatrice Jamal's mother. I know my presence here is a surprise. But as Jamal just said, today is about family and legacy. It got very quiet. You see, I continued my tone deceptively calm and piercing. A mother will go to unimaginable lengths for her child. She will work double shifts, skip meals, and sacrifice her entire youth just to make sure her son has a debt-free future. A mother will even swallow her pride and walk away from her own home if she believes it will keep her unborn grandchild safe. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the silent room until it locked directly onto Chloe. But today, I have learned about a different kind of dedication. I have learned about the astonishing lengths a con artist will go to for $1. I have learned what happens when wicked, heartless people use a good man's purest dreams as a weapon to rob him blind. The room erupted into shocked gasps. Chloe took a stumbling step backward, her face draining of all color. Travis slammed his whiskey glass down on the bar, his face turning beet red as he realized exactly what was happening. I raised my free hand and gave a sharp, deliberate signal toward the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom. The doors swung open violently, and Mr. Sterling strode into the room, flanked by 2 towering uniformed police officers. The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. I slammed my heavy black dossier down onto the gift table, right on top of a stack of expensive baby clothes. I did not hold back a single thing. I raised the microphone to my lips and exposed every filthy detail. I told the entire room about my midnight hospital run. I told them about the hushed conversation I overheard between Chloe and her arrogant brother. I reached into the binder and pulled out the crisp, glossy photographs my private investigator had taken. These are pictures of Chloe purchasing a high-grade silicone prosthetic belly online, I announced, throwing the photos across the table. And these are the medical records, proving she had a procedure 5 years ago and cannot even conceive a child. I pulled out another stack of papers and pointed a firm finger directly at Travis. And this is the documentation of the $100,000 illegal gambling debt Travis owes. A debt they planned to pay off by manipulating my son into signing away my home and his life savings into a fraudulent trust. Travis let out a feral, furious roar. He lunged forward aggressively, his fists clenched, ready to strike me right there in front of everyone. But he never even made it past the front row of tables. The 2 police officers intercepted him instantly, grabbing his arms and slamming him face first onto a linen-covered table, slapping heavy metal handcuffs on his wrists. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Guests were screaming, backing away in pure horror. In the sheer panic of the moment, Chloe tried to back away toward the emergency exit, but her high heel caught the edge of the thick carpet. She stumbled hard, twisting her body to brace for the fall. As she hit the ground, the outline of her dress twisted unnaturally. The heavy silicone prosthetic shifted completely out of place, sliding grotesquely to the side of her waist for every single person in the room to see. Jamal stood frozen, looking down at the woman he had married. His eyes moved from the displaced silicone lump under her dress to the undeniable medical files scattered across the table. He fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands as a gut-wrenching sob tore from his throat. His entire world was crumbling into dust as the horrific realization washed over him. He had banished his own mother, the woman who gave him everything, for a vile, calculated lie. Mr. Sterling calmly walked up to the sobbing Chloe, who was still sprawled on the floor. He dropped a thick stack of legal documents right into her lap. "Those are formal eviction notices and a comprehensive lawsuit for severe financial fraud," Mr. Sterling said in a cold, professional tone. "You have exactly 1 hour to remove your belongings from my client's property before you're arrested for trespassing." I stood tall amidst the wreckage of their perfect little scam. I looked down at the 2 thieves who had tried to steal my life and felt nothing but profound, righteous satisfaction. I had reclaimed my home, my assets, and my absolute power. A few months have passed since that day in the ballroom. The dust has settled, and the silence in my life is no longer heavy with grief, but light with beautiful, hard-earned peace. Chloe and her brother Travis are currently facing severe criminal charges for wire fraud and attempted extortion. Their little house of cards collapsed entirely, leaving them with nothing. As for my son Jamal, he is a broken man. He showed up at my doorstep in tears, begging on his knees for my forgiveness, pleading for another chance to be the son I raised. I looked at my boy, the child I gave my youth to, and I told him the absolute truth. I told him that I will always love him because he is my flesh and blood, but love does not erase deep betrayal. I told him he has to earn his way back into my life, step by hard step. Today, I am back in my beautiful paid-off home. I spend my mornings polishing my hardwood floors and tending to the vibrant rose bushes in my front yard. I am finally living life entirely on my own terms, free from manipulation and disrespect. I want to leave you all with one final, incredibly powerful life lesson that I truly had to learn the very hard way. A mother's love is unconditional, but a woman's dignity is absolutely not negotiable. You must never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, make you a visitor in the beautiful life you built with your own 2 hands. If you enjoyed my story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it over there? Stay strong, ladies. Until next time.